I'm Pamela Mar at the International Chamber of Commerce Digital Standards Initiative. These SMEs have a perverse incentive to digitalize because every additional request for digitalization is more work.
I'm Oswald Coiler at the Asian Development Bank. There'll be one for every one of those document types. And what each of them will do is say, look, for a commercial invoice, here's all the different standards that are applicable to a commercial invoice. And here's all the data structures for all the different systems that creates commercial invoice.
We're willing to listen to you and to work together with you, developer to developer, for our future upgrades so that it will be infinitely easier to bring on the SME community, especially those in the emerging markets.
Welcome to Trade Treasury Payments, the podcast unlocking the future of cross-border finance.
From transaction banking and money movements
to liquidity, treasury, and cash management.
We bring you expert insights and the latest trends shaping global finance.
Hi, I'm Dipesh Patel, editor at Trade Treasury Payments. Today, we're taking a bit of a deep dive into something that touches most products that we interact with. It's global trade. You might imagine a world of advanced logistics and sleek digital systems, but on average, a single cross-border trade transaction still involves the exchange of 36 physical documents and around 240 copies. With that in mind, the ICC Digital Standards Initiative has just launched a new paper, a roadmap, and I'm delighted to be joined by Pamela Mar, Managing Director of the ICC DSI and also on the editorial board of Trade Treasury Payments, and Oswald Coiler, Senior Digital Trade Advisor at the Asian Development Bank and also on the Global Advisory Panel of TTP. Welcome both, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So let's jump straight into the paper. Pamela, let's start with you because the paper clearly distinguishes the difference between digitizing documents and building true interoperability. What's the biggest misunderstanding that we have today in terms of stakeholders understanding interoperability, and what does that actually require in practice?
So I wouldn't say that we have a misunderstanding of where we're going. Actually, there's broad agreement, no matter where you look in the trade stakeholder universe, that ultimately we do want digital documents and data to be exchanged and to seamlessly flow from upstream to downstream, and for this data to be packaged and aggregated by permission in order to drive insight and inclusion and financing. Okay, so there's agreement on where we're going. Now, there's massive lack of clarity on how we're going to get there because the commercial organizations which are tasked with making this transition towards a seamless data flow, they're trapped in today's commercial realities, which are closed networks, misaligned data standards, all kinds of pressure, lack of financing for investing in the future systems, and so on. And there's a big divergence between the public and private sector over their own understanding of how do we get to interoperability. So the purpose of this paper is it's a first step to try to articulate how do we together inch forward, iterate together, bring on new partners to the system, inch forward again, and iterate and again and again, because this will not be a revolution. It will be an iterative, gradual change where we bring in more partners because they see how logical and how rational and how beneficial an interoperable global trading system can be.
But I guess, and Oswald, turning to you, because we're in a pretty messy world right now when it comes to the real world trade environments. I can see you clapping and nodding there. So what's proven hardest on this journey? Because yes, we have a clean standards-led vision, but we're currently in a bit of a pickle right now.
Yeah, so I think it's a unique challenge and complexity, which was really the hardest. So imagine the problem at scale, right? So you have over 36 different trade document types. Some of those trade documents have hundreds of different fields per document type. There's many different standards, many different systems, and all of that is being used by over 160 million businesses, if not more globally. So if you just think about the scale of the challenge, that this roadmap is giving clarity towards, I don't think there's anything like it. There's definitely nothing like it in any one of the businesses that we engage today. At the end of the day, the answer to the exam question cannot just be for us all to convince the whole world to do everything using one standard in one way, and there we go. I think Pamela would need 200-300 years to go on a journey like that. So what's been interesting about that complexity and that challenge is seeing how the DSI has worked through that complexity to actually get to a point where we can start addressing and solving those problems. So you have people like Hannah, for example, at the DSI, who's just done phenomenal leadership and bringing together the right type of people to actually help resolve that. Now, when you think about that level of complexity, Dipesh, it really requires leadership, coordination, expertise, and global reach to solve. And when you think about all four of those components, there's not many organizations on this planet that people can actually reach out to and say, help, how do I do it? No single multilateral development bank is big enough. No single standards body is big enough. No single block of countries is big enough. And that's really where I think one of the answers in dealing with that complexity is actually the ICC itself. And I think that's also one of the benefits of the roadmap. Isn't just the clarity the roadmap provides, but it is the scale, the reach that the ICC has so that we can bring the entire global community together towards this journey. And I think that's also quite valuable. In addition to the roadmap itself, having the entire planet kind of moving into a similar direction.
Let's take a step back. Oswald, you guys got to this conclusion of there are a certain finite small number of actors that actually can make a difference. And that solution isn't going to those 160 million businesses because Pamela's not going to live for 300 years. I don't think we have the technology there, sadly. And we don't have time to do it that way. So what's your engineering behind that kind of pyramid of those key decision makers that can make a difference?
The first one is, again, and it's going to sound like I'm trying to sell ICC or not, like it could have been anyone, right? But at the end of the day, there is only one ICC on this planet, right? And you do need to bring together banks, carriers, shippers, the public sector, etc., because this isn't a problem just one community can solve. We've tried that. The banking community for the last 20 years, if you think about it, the first EBLs was produced as an offshoot company out of Swift, and that was about 22 years ago. So the banking community tried to do it. The mining community also tried to do it. The mining community did a major push about 15 years ago to try and resolve trade digitization, and that's where I originated from. And so you can go to all these communities. The carrier community also heavily invested about 10 years ago when the blockchain kind of paradigm come up. And the evidence clearly shows that no single community is big enough and impactful enough to really ultimately drive the scale. You need an organization across the different communities. Now, what ICC has been able to do is both operate at a strategic level, a tactical level, and an operational level. So what does that mean? At a strategic level, you have people like Pamela being able to actually engage all of the different standards bodies and a lot of the great technology providers out there that the business community relies on to execute its trade. At the tactical level, you've been able to have people like Hannah play that role that says, if we're going to deliver something that helps us digitize trade, it has to ultimately be something that software engineers and developers can ultimately use and implement. And that's where the origination of both initially the KTDE came from, which is on this tactical level, we have all these fields and all these documents. What do they all mean? And now transitioning into a world, and you'll see it in the roadmap, where we have these implementation guidelines, and we can actually give people for an invoice, use this, implement it, and it can actually help translate that. And on an operational level, what's also been fantastic about the DSI is being able to pull in people like ADB and a few other organizations to say, hey, can you help deliver this component of the challenge? And so if you have a look, you've had great organizations like GS1 help deliver the KTDE, with a lot of other organizations playing a part there too. You have ADB and a whole bunch of other organizations working on the actual implementation guidelines. If you think about the level of complexity I just described, this is the level of solutioning that's ultimately required to address the problem.
So let's talk about those solutions. And Pamela, and I did actually have to Google this beforehand, but TCP IP is a set of rules that governs the connection of computer systems to the internet. And I think we can all kind of understand that idea. And I guess the paper makes quite a compelling case that digital trust via legal entity identifiers or reliability frameworks or digital signatures needs to become that baseline layer, which is what you talked about in this roadmap. So how do we embed this kind of trust like TCP IP, but for trade, in what is today highly fragmented and multi-platform, which is, I think, we have to operate within that framework.
So I think we have to realize that the trading community today involves millions of enterprises. Most of them are very small, even though they sit in supply chains which are ultimately controlled by multinationals. And we know 2/3 of global trade is controlled by multinationals. Now, how do you enable these SMEs to survive? Because today, in a world of closed networks with unclear standards, and with data that is governed differently, has different cadences, has different standards, where the alignment is not clear, these SMEs have a perverse incentive to digitalize, because every additional request for digitalization is more work and more complexity, and digitalization is not solving a problem for them. Now, we will have a very difficult time to go out to hundreds of millions of SMEs and talk to them about the future generation of TCP IP. In fact, they have no bandwidth to deal with that. So how do we deal with this? Our answer is to go to the infrastructure, right? What is our IT infrastructure? It is ERP systems, largely which are run by a definable number of IT and ERP service providers who are always doing regular updates, who are always tweaking data standards and dealing with issues like connectivity and finding the solutions to how do you connect data together and make sense of it. So that's the reason why we need to solve the first mile and last mile problem. First mile because data is embedded in corporate ERP systems and it is trapped there unless we can get it to align and interoperate with global platforms. Conversely, we need data to be ingested by those global platforms into corporate ERPs. Otherwise, there will be a very difficult time. The multinationals will be fine. Okay, they have IT staff to deal with this stuff. But the SMEs, the ones who we really hope to integrate into global trade, they need help from their ERP and IT infrastructure providers. And that's why in September, we are partnering with the WTO, with ADB, and with the World Customs Organization to try to convene this IT infrastructure community and make them advocates for digitalizing global trade. If you go to your digital trade and trade events today, we don't see any of them. They should be in the forefront of the charge, and we're going to try to pitch to them, here's why you should get involved, because it's an answer for your addressable market problem, is that basically the whole world becomes your market if we bring these SMEs along on digitalization, because it helps you meet your inclusion and SDG targets, all of which you have committed to, and because ultimately we're going to grow the trade pie larger. And that's good for you. That's good for the world. So in September, WTO, I'm really hoping that this can be a new generation of engagement for the entire digital trade community.
You heard it here first on trade treasury payments. Microsoft's Zeros of the world. If Pamela and Oswald come knocking at your door, see you at the WTA.
Hey, enjoying this podcast? Hit that follow button for more. Done? Let's get back to it.
Okay, scenario. They are all there in this room and they are brought together. Those, I don't know, call it 200 stakeholders that really have the ability to make those tweaks. What does success look like? Does it mean, with respect to the KTDDE, and you guys need to simplify your acronyms because I can't say them properly, and the KIGS, which I always think of as a new type of drink served in a barrel. You need to go on mute, on unmute and stop laughing. What do they need to do, Oswald? What does good look like?
Yeah, so what good looks like. So before we even get into the room, we're investing an enormous amount of time and energy, and we're doing something quite unique, Dipesh. What we've seen over the last 5-10 years is a lot of people release these really big papers, which is really great at the strategic level and is needed at a tactical level. But ultimately, what we need to do is empower all of those companies to be able to walk up to a developer and say, here's something that I need you to implement. So what have we done? Think about a commercial invoice as an example. So on the commercial invoice, you have a set of different standards, 7 or 8, that's ultimately used in the world today that defines the data. But then you also have another 12 or 13 major software vendors that produce those. So basically, the KTDE is this really powerful tool that gives, whether you're a solutions architect designing systems or an enterprise architect or someone just involved in trade at a strategic level, it gives you the ability to look at all the different document types that you're dealing with and see which data elements are actually used multiple times. So you can imagine between a purchase order, an invoice, et cetera, there will be fields that are ultimately replicated over and over again, and they have similar definitions. So the first strategic level complexity that we had to solve is actually help the world understand that. These fields on all these different document types mean the exact same thing. And that's the first set of value that the ICC was able to produce through the KTDDE. The second set of value, and that's where the KIGS come in, and KIGS is the KTD implementation guideline. Now, what does that do? There'll be one for every one of those document types. And what each of them will do is say, look, for a commercial invoice, here's all the different standards that are applicable to a commercial invoice. And here's all the data structures for all the different systems that creates commercial invoice. And here's how all those fields link up. And why that's important, that actually helps us to go to whether it's a Microsoft, a SAP, or Oracle, whoever it might be. And this comes back to the language that Pamela used earlier in the podcast. When you either export or import or save as or open, when you share that information, how do I translate that in a way that I can now actually use it automatically all the way through my supply chain? Now, why is that important? If we were going to Geneva and Pamela was standing on the stage and going, I want all of you to change your core data structures, the answer would be no. Now, why would the answer be no? Because it's really expensive. Your data structures and your SAP system links to every workflow, every report, all the analytics, and people would have to do a cost-based analysis and go yes or no based on the perceived value that they'll get out of the change. What the KIGs do is they say, you keep your data structure. If you love the way your invoice number is defined in your system, all the more power to you. But what the KIGs do is when you go into the ecosystem, so when you export that information and you share it, use the KIG to actually help you transform that information between systems and people can actually understand it. And they can just do straight through processing. Now, why is that important, Dipesh? Let's use an example. If I create an invoice, I use Excel and I go take one of their templates, produce an invoice, and I PDF it and I send it to you. And you see a date on that invoice and it's 01/04/2024, you have absolutely no idea what that date truly means because you've lost all the logic that I had in Excel. And even in the same countries on the same systems, we actually see the regional settings not applying every single time. What the KIG helps us do is say, when that file gets exported, I can actually save that information on the file in a consistent manner aligned to the KTDE so that people know what to expect. This is not an OCR problem. It's an actual data. Coming back to what Pamela said, is people need to be able to trust the data that they get and trust that they can actually understand what it is. So that's ultimately what's going to be delivered. Now, why is it powerful? The final thing I'll say is it's by developers for developers. So it's not just strategy people sitting together going, how do I deliver the KIGs? It's the actual developers working, again, under Hannah's leadership with the rest of us to go and say, how do we deliver something that the developers who are ultimately going to use it actually want to use?
Oswald, thank you. I don't think you quite answered my question, so I'm going to shoot it over to Pamela instead. Pamela, what does success look like then in terms of the paper out of the back of this meeting? You've got all these ERP systems, IT providers in the room. What do we want to achieve and what's the journey?
So the paper is a first articulation of what this journey together is going to look like, and involving the ERPs, involving companies, involving the trade service providers, and so on, and also the governments. And I hope that by the time we come out of the meeting at the WTO in September, we have the engagement of the ERP providers, or even just a handful, to say, we're willing to listen to you and to work together with you, developer to developer, for our future upgrades, so that it will be infinitely easier to bring on the SME community, especially those in the emerging markets, onto the digital trade journey. The second thing is that, yes, we need the ERP providers to begin to get engaged with us, but I hope by articulating how these different parts to the ecosystem work together. We've got legal, we've got technical, we've got standards, trust, assessments, governments. It's a big machine. And so I hope that by breaking apart the big machine and talking about how each of the different parts and the wheels are turning together in sync, and sometimes maybe not in sync, but we can correct for that, that people will begin to see and they'll have a reason to act. We need to take it out of the range of, is this commercially beneficial to me for the next 6 months? People need to see the bigger picture, because the pie will grow bigger, and they need to see why. And they need to see that the future that everyone talks about, this ideal seamless data flow future, is actually possible, and that we are perhaps closer to it than we imagine.
The paper talks about this concept of no touch data. Is an analogy to this, we need to make the data essentially flow from A to B like water, but not necessarily be compartmentalized and trapped in different spaces and not allowed to flow between them. What does no touch data mean from your perspective, Pamela?
So it's to move from data in different buckets, silos, folders, and sort of automatically flowing to where it needs to flow by permission and by prior design, and with the verification, authentication, and traceability that can be embedded using today's technology already in the data. That's what trusted data is. Data that you can, when you receive it, you can just act on it. And part of that action will probably be automatic, and part of that action will probably be some kind of insight, which then humans can make decisions on. And it's not anything that technology can't deliver today. It's just that we're not using it because of all this gristle and friction, which stops data from moving freely, which is the standards alignment. We're talking about two types of interoperability. One is about the data and the standards and the semantics. The second is interoperability of how do we sharing protocols and practices. Those practices, which are defined across networks and by governments and so on, need to be interoperable, meaning mutually recognized, meaning set to standard. The MLETR defines reliability, and so on.
So it's really about building the highway, not endless custom bridges that trains can go across or cars or people can go across. It's building that kind of foundational layer that lets all of those existing ERP systems, IT systems work together rather than forcing everyone into one giant platform.
Exactly.
So we've had the KTDDE, we've had the KIGs, we've now got this roadmap. If you could leave those trade policymakers, the banks, the logistics companies, the tech platforms, read this, what's the actionable takeaway from this roadmap? What do they need to do today when they read this? Because it's also, you're not asking everyone to reinvent the wheel today, right?
No, but what I'm specifically, and this is now thinking from an ADB perspective, right, is I just want everyone to ultimately support the work that we're doing at the ICC and DSI. Now, what does that mean and why? I think one of the challenges we sometimes face in this world is that resolving foundational challenges where we don't need to compete, it's not where the innovation is going to happen. Those are areas where ultimately we all should come together and ultimately resolve the foundational issues. And so what we have here with ICC and DSI is we have a solid roadmap that has inputs from a broad group of stakeholders into a strategy that is practical and can be executed and is being worked on today. So my biggest question to whether you're busy figuring out what to do with your single window system or your port system, or you want to do something in trade digitization, or you're even just thinking about, I want to negotiate a new trade contract that has a digital component, please reach out to the ICC and the DSI. We're more powerful together. Most of the MDBs are already engaged and working with Pamela on these topics. And I think the more the community comes towards the DSI and supporting these activities, the faster we're actually going to get to the end goal. So that would be my biggest ask, is before you launch something brand new and different, engage with Pamela and see how we work together.
And Pamela, final question to you. Do you truly think that this data-driven, no-touch trade approach will really grow the pie and unlock global commerces and the business that drive that?
I really do think that this is the key to solving the sustainability, social, environmental, and inclusion problems on the supply chain. I've worked at the front lines of the starter supply chains, which is consumer products and clothes, and I've seen the difficulties of suppliers for doing even the simplest automation or digitization. This is an answer, i.e. digitalization of the trade processes with interoperability and with clear standards for how these digital documents and data are shared. This is the answer for how do you unleash the power of supply chains and trade to enable growth in the emerging markets. And we can do this today. We're getting very, very close. Legal is gaining momentum. It's going to happen. Legal infrastructure, we're going to get there. Now, technical infrastructure, we finally figured out how do we make interoperability work based on where we are today, not based on creating some new dream framework, which can't be delivered in any reasonable amount of time. We have to start from where we are.
Thank you, Pamela. We've talked about the enormous paper burden, the frustrating fragmentation we still see today, and the solutions that are emerging, a common data language through the KTDDE. We're seeing what is effectively portable digital trust with the LEI and reliable assessment framework, and that interoperability layer, sort of like the internet's TCP IP. It really feels like the building blocks are falling into place faster than we might think. The challenge now is coordination and concerted execution. This roadmap is not just another report. It is a no-touch trade vision where machine-readable data flows end-to-end and trust is automatically verified. Imagine a world where goods will clear customs, payments will settle, all based on validated data, not physical documents or someone even clicking through those files. We'll continue the conversations at the WTO in just under 2 months. We can't wait. In the meantime, the future of trade is being built right now. Over and out.
And don't forget to follow Trade Treasury Payments
on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.